I would like to call the March 12th, 2026 Council on Aging work session to order. My name is Red Piercy. I'm the administrative assistant to the meeting. Today we're here to talk about our emergency operations plan. We had the good fortune last fall to come across some grant funding from the state of Alaska. Through that funding, we were able to purchase first aid kits, AED supplies, shelf-stable meals, and the ability to hire a contractor to create an emergency operations plan for our facility, specific to our facility. The city of Kenai has their own, but it was not inclusive of the senior center. The senior center was basically listed as, we'll come and save you, but we didn't really have a role in it. So, the grant funding from the state was specific. It wanted an emergency operations plan, and it also wanted a continuity of operations plan, which is basically once you've had an emergency, how do you come back from that emergency and reinstate services? So I'm going to introduce Dan Nelson with Katmai Solutions, who was our contractor, and he put up with me a lot and all my changes, my many changes. And just one more tidbit. Not only did he create an emergency operations plan and a continuity of operations plan, but he also created an annex for us, specific to us, to annex our services between the cities. So without further ado, this is Dan with Katmai Solutions.
Welcome, Dan. Thank you very much, Red. I appreciate that. There weren't that many changes. I don't know what you're talking about. So thank you very much for having me at your work session. I'm Dan Nelson. Some of you know me in other roles. I've been around for a number of years working in different roles, but now I work with Katmai Solutions, and what we do is exactly what I said. We help a couple of different types of organizations, mainly governments, hospital, long-term care facilities, with their emergency planning with their. So sometimes if you go by a hospital and you see a big ruckus, that's probably because I can buy a plan drill just to keep everybody on their toes. We won't be doing that today, I promise. But what I want to do is I've got a short presentation to go through, and I want to talk about these two products. And I know you've got these in front of you. One is our emergency operations plan, and the other is our continuity of operations plan. And you don't have to read these word for word, but we'll go through this. And really the thing here, I'm just going to go through kind of a mini version of the training that some of the employees would get, or if you were a new hire here. Like I said, this is part of a project that was funded with certain requirements. So the first thing I'm going to say is the technical part of these plans is in compliance with something called the Final Rule to the Older Americans Act, which of course is a government mouthful. But what that basically means is, as a condition of receiving the funds, the City of Kenai and the Kenai Senior Center had to agree that we follow that. And so there's certain things in here that are making sure you're compliant with that, because obviously we want to fulfill the grant requirements, and if there's future grants or opportunities, we want you to be set. So some of this stuff might look like it's a little bit bureaucratic, but don't worry about that. We're going to get into the detail. So I'm going to start, and I'm mainly going to talk today mostly about the emergency operations plan. I'm going to talk about the continuity of operations plan again. If you look on the screen, this is the definition of emergency operations plan. This is the federal definition. It's a lot of word salad. But what does this really mean for us? And I might ask questions like this throughout the day. And what I want to say during this presentation is please raise your hands, interrupt me, ask questions, have a discussion. Some of you might have seen my presentation before. I'm going to tell you I like to talk, and I'm kind of a nerd about this stuff. So if you don't want to hear just me talking what I think you should know, raise a hand, give a question, and we'll talk about it. But what does an emergency operations plan do? So this is specifically for the senior center part of the facility, because that's what the grant was designed to do. And basically, what happens when we have something happen? Whether that's natural disaster, whether that's a man-made event, whether it's some sort of criminal activity. This is our playbook now on how our staff, our volunteers are going to respond to this. So in an emergency operations plan, we have a couple different things in here. Again, this is a little bit of some of the bureaucratic part. So the first thing we're going to go through each of these is the risk assessment. What do we think the senior center is at risk? That acronym you see there is called HVA. That's a fancy term for hazard vulnerability assessment. Again, another federal term that we use. Roles and responsibility. Who is responsible for what? how do we communicate with each other? And then we get into things that you're probably used to if you've been in a facility or other type of area that has emergency plans. What exactly are we going to do when X, Y, or Z happens? Then we talk about training and exercise, and finally we have some checklists for your staff. So let me go through what this talks about. If you want to follow along here, we're at about page 6 or 7 of the Emergency Operations Plan where we talk about our hazard vulnerability analysis. So the borough, as part of its duties in emergency management, as well as the city of Kenai, has what we call a hazard mitigation plan. And this is a plan that does a very complete risk assessment. And this methodology we use for your plan matches what the borough and the city use. And we use data that we gather to approximate what the risks are in the city of Kenai, specifically for the senior center. We use a couple different things: level of impact, the magnitude of severity, and the probability. So what are some of the highest risks? We're in an earthquake country, right? So earthquakes, severe weather, wildfire, even here in Kenai, we know some of these things. We're very close to some wild areas. Utility failures, high winds. There's a couple other things we put in. We do have some risk of flooding here, but there's some things that we put in that the senior center and the city can't necessarily control, but we have to be available to deal with those things. Cyber attack, we pretty much always put that in now. That's something that we think about. I think luckily, we're going to knock on this wood, that the city of Kenai and the center hasn't had a significant cyber problem, but there are some communities, Nassau, Valdez, they have. So we think about that. We say terrorism. Really what that means is criminal activity, and we'll talk about that. And utility failure. If we have NSTAR, HEA have any issue, we may not be able to deal with that. We're going to have to deal with the ramifications, perhaps not having electric, not having heat, not being able to prepare meals the way we usually think about that, etc. So that's a hazard vulnerability analysis. In other words, what are we preparing for? So the next part of this is roles and responsibilities. I think we all know who's heading this up. Kathy and Brent are here with us, and they have the primary individuals for executing this plan, making sure that you have the tools as far as volunteers or clients that you need to be able to do some of these things. Everyone, I know we talk about all staff, but everybody has a role in emergency preparedness, so especially folks that are working here at the center. We make sure people know, hey, are we going to have training like this? Are we going to do a workshop? Are we going to do a discussion? People are responsible for attending those, making sure that we have unsafe conditions reported and dealt with, and make sure we know what's in the plans. So we have specific emergency procedures. Excuse me. I can't quite see my text here based on this angle, so apologies for that. It kind of shows up a little bit light. But here's some of the emergency procedures we have. What do we need to do if we need to evacuate the center? Conversely, what do we need to do if we have to shelter in place? Do we have an active assailant? What many people know is an active shooter. What about an earthquake, wildfire, criminal event? What are those types of procedures that we need to do and we need to follow? So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm just going to go through some of these at a very high level and not get into the details, but please stop me if you have any questions. So would we have a scenario where we have to evacuate the center? First thing that we ask our staff and our folks that are here at the desk, or Kathy or Red, is we're going to talk about what's the situation that's out there, and is evacuating the thing that we need to do. Now, most of us are used to the fire alarm going off. That's usually something we're going to evacuate for, right? But what if we have something happening in the building because of severe weather? I hate to give examples because then these things tend to come through true. But we have high winds and we won't say much. We damage the building. It was a little warmer when I came, but this morning it was about 20 below when I left my house. So is it smart to really be out there, or is it safer for us all to be in here? So we kind of go through a little bit of training on that. But if we have to evacuate, our staff are going to announce the evacuation and identify which route out of here is the safest. Do we have fire? Do we have some live electrical lines? Whatever those hazards might be. We know some of our clients here, some of our folks who live in the center have mobility limitations. So if there's folks that need assistance, some of our staff will be assigned to help those folks get out via the safe route. We want to make sure everybody's accounted for. I know you've got the fancy sign-in accountability system out there to help us with that. And we're going to provide basic care and comfort. And generally, we're going to do that until our first responders arrive. But we know that in some cases, it might take our fire department or police department, whoever it is, a little bit of time to get here, especially if whatever caused the incident is happening throughout the city or throughout the region. So when we talk about planning for a long-term evacuation, that's where we're calling in our assistance, right? We know that we don't generally have the ability to shelter in place here. We could, but we don't necessarily have, I want to say we don't have meals here because we usually do, but we don't necessarily have some of those arrangements for sleeping, sanitation in the center itself. So we're going to think about that. The plan talks about who we're going to be calling for that. Usually that's going to be some of our partner agencies. The city will generally be the first one in line to have this conversation when dealing with this planning. They can request assistance from the borough's Office of Emergency Management, who has contacts with voluntary organizations and others to help do that. So that's evacuation. And again, on the flip side, we talk about shelter in place. So when we talk about shelter in place, I don't know how many people remember the old Unical videos they used to distribute. And when we talk about shelter in place, oftentimes people think about it as hazardous materials and stuff. That's where we want to tape up our doors and use duct tape and plastic to seal off the air. You can think of that as shelter in place, but I'm more talking about stay put is something we say now. What happens if we just need to stay here because of some outside incident, and it's just safer for it to stay here? So we're going to announce that, the reason for it, let everybody in the center know. Close lock doors and windows. If we're talking about a stay put, that's probably not necessary, right? Let's say the external reason might be some sort of criminal activity or police activity happening down the street here. It might be advisable for us to lock all the doors and windows. So perhaps if the police department is looking for somebody or trying to identify somebody, we're not causing a situation where they're coming in here. So that's not necessarily a hard and fast rule. It's very situational dependent. We want to communicate with those folks that are giving us information, keep everybody comfortable, right? It's not an overly complicated thing, but we want to keep in touch probably with our city police or fire or manager, whoever that is, to get information about whatever it is that's happening out there. Again, emergency management support can happen if it's necessary. The last bullet on here, when we talk about medications, medical equipment, sleeping arrangements, that kind of leads into what I was saying before, and that it's probably pretty unlikely that we would get into that scenario. But what if? I remember, I will not say how young or old I happened to be when this happened, but many, many years ago, we had a chlorine leak in the city of Salina. I happened to live right next to that chlorine generating wastewater plant. So luckily that actually, I think we sent it down the river as exactly what happened and sent it over here to Kenai, but it eventually dissipated and it was no big deal. But what if we had something like that happen in the middle of the day and it was going to be 24 hours or so? So I know we don't have the sleeping arrangements here specifically, but I think in some of the supplies that you were able to get with this grant, we've got some kind of interim supplies if we need them here at the center. And of course, the best kitchen on the peninsula. So, right.
Thank you very much. Mm-hmm.
You're welcome. Usually, by the way, I try and say, well, let's do this meeting about 11, then, oh, I have to stay. It didn't work. That's So active assailant procedure or active shooter, however you'd like to call it. We call it active assailant in the planning world just because there's more weapons that exist than firearms, but this is usually what we see. And I think, end of last year, we had some training specifically on this topic, but we mirror the training that Kenai Police Department gives. So we use a methodology called run, hide, fight. There's a couple different methodologies out there. You might be familiar with ALICE. That's a protocol that the schools use quite a bit. But essentially, we train our folks to escape the area if we can. If it's safe to do so, you have the escape route. If you are not able to escape, we encourage people to hide. So the first thing you do with that, you silence your devices. That is an amazingly common issue is make sure your mobile phones, those other things are silenced, and then you go and try and hide somewhere and remain quiet. And then fight with you as a last resort. So run by fight's a national protocol, but it's been integrated into your emergency plan here. You know, we hope that we don't have to deal with these things. I used to say we, have a very low likelihood of that until we didn't. And so we do plan for these things and recruit and train our staff every so often with these things. So, earthquake. Has anybody done the Great Alaska Shakeout? Done the drop, cover, and hold on? I can drop, cover, and hold on. It's the getting up under the furniture that I have. But that is the best way to do it. If we have an earthquake in this room right now, I'm looking at a number of things hanging here, the light fixtures perhaps, this very smart TV that I finally got figured out how to turn on, that one mounted there in the room. So there are some different things. If we had a severe earthquake, what that would look like. We all know most of our earthquakes are not severe, right? We get a little jolt. I think there was one a couple of weeks ago, it was about 6:30 in the morning. I woke up, my wife's an earthquake. I said, not big enough, and went back to sleep. That's how I look at it. But especially if we have newcomers to the stage or people that aren't familiar with that, we can instruct people to drop, cover, and hold on. If the shaking is stopped, it starts looking safe for us. We'll check for injuries, as we usually do. Again, usually injuries in an earthquake are things falling on people. Get people up from underneath the tables. I need help with that sometimes. Take a look around our building. Now, we're not professional building engineers. We do have a department for that, folks in the city that know how to do it. But let's just check for structural damage, see if we can find anything. There's a note in here that says shut off utilities if necessary and safe. We go into a little bit more of that in training. So essentially what people say in earthquakes, and I'm kind of sharing this for your own homes as well. Things like natural gas, things like electricity, if there's a leak, if there's some sort of issue, we tell people to shut off their utilities, to do that. In general terms, we don't want to do that unless we know for sure that there's an issue. And I think when Red and I were talking about this, I said, you got to make sure we emphasize the fire department should probably be the one to do this for you. The reason for that, especially with natural gas, you can turn it off just fine. It requires some other folks to come turn it back on, installer or professional. So we don't want to turn that off, cut off for heating and some of those things unless we need to. Do we have anybody missing? Conduct an accountability check. So when we talk about an earthquake that is severe, again, severe is very hard to quantify. This is basically our procedure for staff here. To drop, cover, and hold on, and then help folks as we go. Couple things on this plan, and you're certainly free to look through this, of course, at your leisure. But what we did add here at the end in section 9. If I can find my section 9. But essentially, there's checklists back here. So these are quick references that we can take out from our staff or have posted around the building, whatever the preference is. So for very quick things, because if we come and do this, it's just like anything else. Let's say we come in and we do this training once a year for folks. That's great. We're also probably doing some mandated safety training, some OSHA training, some city training. By the time our folks get done with all this training, we fill their head with all the things that they're doing on a daily basis. So we don't always remember. So that's why we have a quick reference checklist as part of this plan. I feel like I went very quickly through that. So I want to stop here because that is kind of my slides on the emergency operations plan. But I wonder if anybody has any questions, comments, anything I can go a little bit more of a deep dive if they're interested.
I'm obviously older than you. I remember all you have to do is get under your desk and it stops the nuclear warheads from Russia.
Yes. Yes.
And there again, when you're 7, you can get back out.
Right.
Under your desk. Not when you're 70 plus.
So I have a lot of, I've got a little archive of some of the videos and things, the Bert the Turtle video from that era. And it's actually a very interesting case study because what we really try and do these days is be very practical, be very realistic. And I think that era, I don't think the wooden school desk was going to stop that from us. So there was definitely kind of, as things have become declassified after 50 years, I've read a little bit more about that. Yeah, there's a little bit of, we just need to give somebody something to. Right? So can I promise this is not like that in this one? Yeah, it's, I actually did a whole little interview for somebody on the history of emergency management, and that's a lot of where it started, was back in that what we call civil defense back then. Now we call it Homeland Security, or we call it emergency management. Yeah. Other questions before I talk a little bit about continuity? And we can certainly come back to some of these things if you see this. So I want to talk, I'm not going to get into too much detail about our continuity of operations plan, but Red talked a little bit about this. This is one of those requirements that we need to have under that rule of the older Americans legislation. So what's a continuity of operations plan? So we just had an emergency operations plan. So that tells us what we need to do immediately in the event that something has happened here at the facility. How do we take care of people? How do we make sure everybody's safe? What are those immediate things we do? Continuity of operations plan is a little bit different. So something has happened. And for a continuity of operations plan to come into effect, it doesn't necessarily have to be any of those things we had up on the screen. It doesn't have to be a wildfire. It doesn't have to be an earthquake. Here's my favorite example that I like to use. I like to use this with government. So I work a lot. I worked for almost 20 years for the borough, and I will say, if you've ever been over in the borough building, no offense, but it's got some age to it, right? So before they remodeled the IT section, a whole bunch of expensive computers that run the world, and then you have sprinkler pipes right above it. It wasn't always a computer room, right? We do what we can do. So my example is, so somebody leaves the back door open when they came into work for the weekend, accidentally it freezes. Now you don't have any computers. What do you do? Something like that can be something we use our continuity of operations plan for. This plan says, what is it that we need to keep doing? What are our essential functions? You can see that term a lot. So we define our essential functions. What staff do we need to do those things? What systems, what records, what tools, what supplies. So when we go through a continuity of operations plan, there's a lot more of that of the bureaucracy. I mean, you're going to see there's a lot more words. This is a little bit of a thicker plan. And encourage you, it's not necessarily necessary to always read the whole thing word for word. But this goes through the process. So sitting with Brett, sitting with Kathy, looking at everything the senior center does. What are our priorities? And so senior nutrition and food service was our number one priority. So if we have something that disrupted our ability to do that, again, a pipe froze, we can't get in the building. Could be something as simple as that. It could be that an active assailant came in and maybe this is now a crime scene for a while, we can't get back in. But it also can be something as simple as, I'm going to say simple, again, knock on wood, gas main had an issue and Instar can't get gas to them. I'm going to assume your cooking is done by natural gas, right? So how do we deal with that? We didn't cause it. We're waiting for people to fix it. But in the meantime, we have priorities. That's what a continuity of operation plan really looks like. Is something has happened, now it's time for us to recover from that. And if we're not able to do all the things we normally do, how do we do it? So for instance, Council on Aging might not be a priority to meet during that time, right? Because we have our staff devoted to keeping senior nutrition and food service up. We also have a couple other priorities in order, which is health, transportation, and then wellness checks and status checks for our clients. So keeping in touch with them. Now I know I wasn't over here, but I certainly was involved with it. So does this sound familiar to anybody? Have you done this before?
Yeah.
When did you do it?
I worked in the state forestry and the Forest Service both, and I've had been under several different operation plans with fires and all kinds of situations.
Absolutely. Any other examples? How about when the senior center might have done it? Kathy?
COVID.
COVID. Did you change how things operated? Did you still do the core services, but you had to do it differently? That's what this is. That's the easiest way I can tell you. We are going to do the things we need to do. We've decided in advance what pieces of those are important. And this goes into a little bit more detail. There's even more detail. I mean, honestly, we copied your COVID plan quite a bit in this because you already did it. You didn't call it this, but you've already done it during COVID. So we might not do necessarily all of the what I'll call the cultural programs or some of those types of things, but we're going to make sure people are fed, their health needs are taken care of, those core essential services. So that's what the continuity plan is. For employees, generally, when we train this, we ask them to understand what their roles are. Some employees may not do what they normally do. So I think, please correct me if I'm wrong, Captain. So I think some people were conscripted as drivers and some of that during COVID, more so than what they were normally doing. So we might have a little bit more, we're serving people outside our physical planning setting. Somebody might turn from doing activities to a runner, and doing errands and things to support that, whatever that happens to be. So we ask people to understand what that looks like, what their responsibilities might be, which is going to vary from individual to individual, right? And then the other thing, because I really can't give speeches like this without talking about this, we ask people to be prepared at home. So I'm not going to ask anybody if they're prepared at home or not, or for how long. But one of the important things that happens when we deal with this is if we have people that have needs, or clients that have needs and things like that, nobody can come to work because fill in the blank. Maybe they've got young children and they need to be taken care of, but we don't really have a place for them to go. We don't have the supplies, and whatever that happens to be, we ask people to think about that and encourage them to have some preparedness at home. So I think the slide here talks about having essentials for 7 days. So what I talk about with people on that is, would you be okay? Something you can think about. Would you be okay to survive without any external help for 7 days? You have food, you have your medicine, you have your backup source of power and heat or cooking. So those are the questions we ask. So we always encourage folks, of course, as an employer, you can't make anybody do anything, but it's something we will really like to encourage folks. FEMA says 7 days, that's why I have it up there. 14 days, right? Up here. Trust me on this one. Yeah, I know what the supply chain looks like. 14 days. So just erase that 7. Questions on the continuity of operations plan, or questions on anything else? I came to the end of my formal presentation, but certainly happy to discuss anything or answer questions. Kathy, did I miss anything?
No, I wanted to say, so just to give you guys an example, currently right now, I oversee the post drivers and the regular people drivers. If, let's say, an emergency were to come up, Missy would assume that role over all drivers that have to do with meals, and maybe transportation may be on hold at the moment and they need to be designated. Then Missy would become and actually oversee that, and then she would designate her kitchen help according to this plan. So in a lot of scenarios, the roles that we currently have may change. So that he's right, because we did talk about a scenario. I think we talked about a scenario where maybe is it Parks and Rec, their staff in a pinch could be used to help us transport people if we needed to in an emergency. Those were all different scenarios that we talked about.
And I'll just add, we did talk about, you mentioned at the beginning, that there is an annex to the city plan now that really a little bit more better, it's not very good English, describes how it is that the senior center, what their role is supposed to be. Sometimes people like me come in and just over the years we say, well, so-and-so is going to do this. Oh, senior center's got a great kitchen. They're going to provide all the meals. Well, nobody told the senior center they were going to provide all the meals, right? And so we had some very good talks with some of the department heads and Terry, the city manager, to get some of that. So we didn't get too much into that, but what I'm going to call it is the senior center's place in the bigger city was discussed, and I think we got that straightened out.
So does the city have a designated area for evacuation if we had to evacuate the senior from here?
So we talked about a couple different areas as kind of different ideas. And when I talk about that short term, so for instance, maybe we're all going to go just to someplace warm because we've got an immediate thing that happens. But that longer term, there's that one bullet that said prepare for a long-term evacuation if you need it. That's where the city would look at. There is a shelter inventory of different places actually throughout the whole Kenai Peninsula. And there's quite a few facilities in Kenai, but it's really kind of up to the city to look at whatever that situation is at the time of the table. So I wouldn't want to say that there's one generated or identified specifically for the senior center. But I think there's a list of 8 or 9 different things. And so just for example, I know some of those buildings aren't really being used anymore. We've got the Challenger Center, we've got the Prism facility over at Marathon. We've got local churches here that are identified, some of which people have agreements with. So there's an inventory, but we don't lock it in because we just don't know what the situation is. So we don't say you will absolutely always go here because it might be unsafe at the time.
But that kind of answered the question I was asking, though, is that you have gone that next step as far as knowing that there are availability of moving people to different places and stuff.
Because the city has their own plan. So this plan, pretty thin, is specifically focused to here, but it complements, that's that annex to the city's greater plan. So yes, the answer is yes. But
So just to follow up with that, since the Challenger Center has now become not the Challenger Center, and the city has back the building, the senior center just filed for DEC work permit there for a kitchen. The Challenger Center kitchen is the senior center's backup kitchen. So we now, DEC approved, DEC, we're all good with DEC. In the event we have something happen in our kitchen, our senior center would be using the Challenger Center. And that's a continuity of operations. So I'm sure the Challenger Center, depends on what the city decides to do with it. It has showers, it has beds, it has things available too. So, but for us, for evacuation purposes, in the event of the bluff or an earthquake would be our biggest issue, would be one of the schools. It'd be up to city emergency services on getting people out of this building and to another location.
wonderful news. I know we talked a few months ago about the scenario, but
Yeah.
I think that was before it actually closed. So
You were thinking about things happening when we don't ever want them happening. But if we were to use gas, we would alter power for heating. Is there anything that probably the senior center wouldn't use that? But the city definitely would, and I don't want to get into what they have, but I'm wondering. For a temporary thing, what would we do? Say we had a big week, would we have some we used to have a facility where we could cook on the Great Finger. I don't think that's longer available, but would that be something that is around that we could utilize something like that? Definitely cooking food would be priority.
and I'm going to preface this by saying I don't have this in my memory of exactly where, but typically when we look at food, if we lose natural gas, and I just want to emphasize, losing natural gas from a probability standpoint is a very low probability. But if we did, there are, quite frankly, very large barbecues that run off propane, like industrial. Some of the plants have them out north, Borough has one. So there are some facilities, whether there's enough that would run off, say, propane, or most people around here don't have electric appliances because they're not very efficient, but potentially being able to bring in as an emergency those electric appliances. Now, of course, where's the gas broken? Is it over in Luga? Is it here? So we get into a couple different things about where the system is having an issue, but likely that's going to be some emergency procurement on part of the city to get some of those things. I will say there are military assets that can do that. They're self-contained. I don't want to say we can't count on the military, because we certainly can, but my joke always was, well, if things show up in Anchorage, do they get past the 250,000 people in Anchorage? So I think you do have a good point, but I don't know. I don't have the inventory off the top of my head of where those things are. So I might have to get what I can. I'm here with another answer because I just don't have to complete one right this second.
And that goes along with 7 days of shelf-stable meals. So 7 days of, if you can't cook, you should have 7 days of something that is shelf-stable. Canned salmon, tuna fish, things that you would not need to cook. That's a recommendation.
One thing I'll add to that, of course, they've got some the old MREs with the little heating element that they already have. So now you might not like those. But one thing that I'll suggest, because honestly, I tell people to do this, go down to Three Bears and get your Mountain House or some of these brands. Try them out one day. You'll see, if you know how to cook them, if they're good. What I will say, nothing against children, but especially very young children. We often have the misconception as adults that, well, it's an emergency, we'll eat what we have and we'll get through it. Very young children won't do that. So make sure you share that with your children, have them try it out to make sure it's like that. But yeah, part of that is definitely a personal preparedness issue, but there are other alternatives in the wider spectrum of places.
I'm pretty green at this. Does this cut off at that door, or is that building included in this? Or does it have its own coop?
So for the purposes of this funding, this cuts off at the senior center door. Now, I do believe the building next door, Ray can correct me, they have their own emergency procedures somewhat.
Somewhat, but here's the thing, just because there's a door there doesn't mean we're not inviting people to come
Oh,
here.
I know that, but I just,
But yes, this, for all purposes, this plan was written for the senior center. But a lot of it, I believe, would probably carry over, to be honest. I mean, we do have all the same, for say, AED next door as well. And they actually have a generator, that will keep their building heated. They also have plugins, like 4 per floor for medical equipment, cell phones, and so they have some things, but I don't believe they have an actual plan, correct? You don't have an actual black and white written plan?
Not to speak of.
Yes.
Many times.
be another branch.
cost? $500,000?
No idea. I don't know how much. They lumped, when they did the one for next door, they lumped it in with the boiler project. So that it would keep heating the boiler.
Yeah.
So that the building didn't freeze up. I do not know what the specific cost would break down was, but I'm sure it's something we looked at.
It's usually, quite frankly, the generators themselves aren't bad. It's actually the transfer and the wiring in the building,
Yeah.
which is your big expense.
Yeah.
But there's ways to mitigate that for we're only going to do certain outlets, or it's just a boiler and limited things. But
Which come to show that we don't.
because there are affordable ones around, again, those resources do exist. But it's just a matter of getting them. So obviously it's always better to have your own. So there's absolutely no alternative. There's even been things recently, and now you go by the substations, they got Tesla storage batteries out there. There's a lot of new things happening for things like power that definitely make it more resilient. One of the interesting things that I learned a long time ago, sometimes I still forget, is the power we generate for these lights was generated about 2 seconds ago, delivered right through us. So HEA and those power utilities really have a lot of work to balance all those things that happen. So you put a load of the system, like we see in the lower 48 air conditioners, and where you sometimes have brownouts, that's those play. We don't have much of a challenge with that. I'm just telling somebody, when I was growing up here, a power outage used to be an 8 or 12 hour affair. It was great. School was canceled and we didn't go. Now it's about 30 minutes for most of us. I think out more, a little bit harder, but I live in Salon. It doesn't bother. It's still something to plan for. Absolutely. Other questions or discussion points that I can help with? Right. I guess I will turn this maybe back over to you, Red, or
Yes,
finish up.
I'm referring to the city of Kenai, the access, the annex that he created, I'll make that available. I apologize for not having to say, it's much slimmer than the 2 handouts you have, but it's definitely clear and direct. So if you would like, I'm happy to make it available. That's all we have for today.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank you
it.
very
Nice
much.
to talk to you all.
I just have a comment to make this kind of after the fact, but you'd be amazed at how these plans roll right into one another and how the city falls in and the borough picks up and they're all kind of mismatched where if something fails at one end, there's really an easy way to be picked up on the next end of it. It's you'd be amazed at how fast and how quick things come together.
And I will say, both here in the city of Kenai and at the borough level, you've got some great people that spend their days working on this stuff, so. You're in good hands, I can say that, I'm a little boastful on that, but you definitely are. Put this feedback without messing it up.